Today's message is called Our Plan versus the Plan. Our plan versus the plan. Have you ever noticed, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Let me just get to where I need to get to. There we go. Sorry about that. Have you ever noticed in life when you're hanging out and like everything is going the way that you thought, you imagined it was supposed to be going? We're all happy, the sun is brighter, the birds sound louder, and life is just this amazing, cool roller coaster that we really, 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 really like. And we think this is perfect. In other words, this is the way life should be. But did you ever notice when all of a sudden something shows up that doesn't look like that? Have you ever noticed that? And what is the reaction when that happens? What does that sound like when something like that happens to us? Dread. Oh no. Oh my gosh. Like these slides are not in the order that I thought they were going to be, like what I'm doing right now. Oh my God, panic, right? Right? Isn't that what we do? How many of us ever sit there and go, God, why me? Have you ever had that experience? Yeah. How many people, I don't know about you, when I sat down and did my goals for 2020, I'm sorry, I forgot, stupid me, to put in COVID-19. How many forgot to put that on their list? Whoops. Yeah. It was 2004. I was sitting in the front living room of my house. I was looking at my wife at that point in time, and she was telling me that she wanted a divorce and wanted to end our relationship. I had 2 girls, and it was something I was completely not expecting. Totally not. So imagine, here I am, having a conversation that I wasn't expecting to have, and she's telling me this. At the same time, my phone rings. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Mike, there's no way on God's green earth you picked up the phone, did you? And the answer to the question is yeah. And the reason I did was because somebody was calling me from work that never called me from work, ever. And I just thought, well, this is kind of crazy. And so I picked up the phone, and what the person on the other end of the phone was telling me was that when I came into work the next day, I was going to be fired. Okay, so stop for a minute and think about that. I'm sitting there. Here's this conversation going on with my wife at the time, and here's a conversation going on about my job. My job, which, by the way, I spent 6 years building up a company into a multi-million-dollar company, and I thought the conversation was going to be, let's talk about your partnership and how many millions of dollars you're going to be worth in the next 5 years. That's what I thought the conversation was going to be. So I'm sitting there looking at this thing, and again, I'm looking at my wife at the time, I'm looking at my cell phone. She doesn't know this other conversation is going on. Can you see the smoke? Can you see what's going on in my life right at this moment? Yeah. As you can imagine, I didn't sleep really well that night. In fact, I hardly slept at all. And I remember getting up in the morning, and I went down to Collins Park in East Grand Rapids on Reed's Lake. And it was early, there was nobody down there, and I was devastated. I was just, as you can imagine. And I was just going, what? You know, it's not like, I was sitting there ignoring or forgetting my spirituality, my divinity. It's not like I wasn't practicing everything that I knew how to practice. It's not like I didn't know that there was something inside of me. But I still could not, for the life of me, understand how something like this could be happening. How I'm losing my family and my relationship that I've been in for 10 years, and I'm losing my job all within 30 seconds of each other. I just could not understand it. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm just going, I'm trying to process it, as you can imagine. I mean, I'm everywhere, but I just remember saying, like, help. Like, I can't comprehend what's going on right now. I really, really, really can't. And what was amazing to me is that there's a thought that came through my mind that was a teaching from somebody I used to study with, and that thought flashed into my mind, and the thought said, it's never outside of yourself. Interesting thought. It's never outside of yourself. And I'm like, well, okay, I'm game. What's that mean? And the thought that continued was, do you understand that you're sitting there looking at your then wife and this person that thought you were in business with, and you're pointing your finger at them? What if it has nothing to do with them? What if it has nothing to do with them? What if it's not outside of yourself? What if it's something, they're just a reflection of what's going on inside of you? Huh? What? Are you kidding me? And as I sat there, I'm trying to process this, and all of a sudden what came to my mind was, really look at the relationships, those two relationships, the relationship that you had with your wife at the time, and look at the relationship you had with this person who you thought you were in business with. Look at them. And think about, what do you feel they did to you? Because you keep saying they did it, they did it, they did it. What is it that they did to you? And I'm just sitting there going, honestly, it feels like they've abandoned me. I feel like the two closest, literally what I told myself is the two closest relationships in my life, they've abandoned me. They've abandoned me. And then all of a sudden it was like, is there a chance that maybe, just maybe, the reason that all this is happening is because the truth of the matter is that you've abandoned yourself in those relationships? Now, I'm telling you this story 16 years after it happened. I've got tremendous clarity on why that happened right now. Because what I learned in my healing process was that I was in two very codependent relationships in those examples. They were codependent relationships. What do codependent relationships mean? They mean that you lose your sense of self. I had completely lost me in the relationship I had in my marriage, and I completely lost Mike, me, in the relationship that I had in my business partner. I completely lost myself. And where I was headed was not pretty. If you know any or have studied anything about codependent relationships, they wind up going, well, they can be destructive. A lot worse than what was going on in that moment. And so it took me a while. It took me a while to heal. It's not like I got up from that time down in Collins Park and jumped up and said, oh, thank you, God, for ruining my family, and thank you for ruining my business. That's not exactly what happened. But what did happen over time is I was able to look back and understand that while I had a plan, there was also the plan that was going on. Right? All right, we're going to go back and get these slides in order. How's that? All right, one more. There we go. How many know who that is? Steve Jobs. He created a little company, just the largest in the world. How many people know that Steve Jobs was fired from Apple? Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. How many people know that when he was fired from Apple after he created it, that he went on to try 2 more things, businesses that failed? And then how many people knew that he went back to Apple and basically changed, some would argue, our entire civilization because he created the iPhone? When he was looking back at what happened to him, he made the following statement: I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He knew and he understood that although his plan wasn't unfolding the way he thought it would or should, that there was another plan that could possibly lead him to bigger, better, and brighter things. Right? Because what he understood after he went through this, and what I started to understand as I processed this, is sometimes in life what we don't understand is something that I'm going to call the setup. What is the setup? The setup is something that we go through that is going to lead us to something bigger, better, and brighter. But I love this picture because what this picture shows you is what? There's fog. You can't really see. You don't understand. You're confused. You can get frustrated at people. You can get frustrated at God. You can feel lost. That's part of the setup. That's part of the setup. If you would have told me that me getting a divorce from my wife and my family was a good thing in the moment that it was happening, I can't do what I would say to you on the stage right here, right now. I can't do that. I get in trouble. But it would not have been, oh, thank you for reminding me and telling me that this is a blessing. That is not what my response would have been. Same thing with the guy that I was in business with. I was thinking I was on my way to being a millionaire. I did. But if you would have told me in that moment that's what was going on, that is not what was going on in my moment when those things were going through my head. If you would have told Steve Jobs, hey, Steve, don't worry about Apple. Those 2 businesses you tried and didn't work out, it's all good, it's all good. No, that's not the way it works. But it doesn't mean that when things look like they are not going well, that there isn't something else that's going on. How many people know who she is? Louise Hay. Anybody hear that name? She only sold a little book called You Can Heal Your Life that sold 33 million copies, and she created one of the largest publishing companies, self-help, motivational, personal growth and development publication companies in the world. That's her. No big deal. Did you know she didn't start that until she was 50 years old? 50. When everything started to change for her. I want to share with you a little bit of her story. Yeah, I'm just going to do it up here, Dan. People often look at my lectures and think, oh, she's got it all together. She's never had a problem in her life and she knows all the answers. That's far from the truth. I personally do not know of any good teachers who have not been through many dark nights of the soul. Most of them have come from some incredible, difficult childhoods. It's through the healing of their own pain that they learn how to help others and heal their own lives. In my own case, I know that my life was absolutely wonderful as far as I remember, until I was 18 months old. Like, she actually remembers this? Then everything hit the fan for me, especially from my point of view. My parents suddenly divorced. My mother was an uneducated woman who went to work as a live-in maid. I was placed in a series of foster homes. My whole world collapsed. There was nothing I could count on and no one to hold me and to love me. Finally, my mother was able to get a domestic job where she could have me live with her. But by then, the damage was done. When I was 5 years old, my mother remarried. Years later, she told me she did that so she would have a home. Unfortunately, she married an abusive man, and life became hell for both of us. It was during the same year that I was raped by a neighbor. When this act was discovered, I was told that it was my fault and that I had embarrassed the family. There was a court case, and I still remember the trauma on the medical examination being forced to testify. The rapist was given a 16-year prison sentence. I lived in fear of his release because I believed he would come and get me for being such a bad girl as to put him in jail. I also grew up in the Depression. We had almost no money at all. There was a neighbor who used to give me 10 cents a week, and this money went into the household budget. In those days, you could buy a loaf of bread and a box of oatmeal for 10 cents. On my birthday and Christmas, she would give me the enormous sum of $1, and my mother would go to Woolworths and buy me underwear and socks for the year. My clothes came from Goodwill. I had to go to school in clothes that did not fit me. My childhood was one of physical abuse, hard labor, poverty, and ridicule at school. I was made to eat raw garlic every day so that I would not get worms. I didn't get worms, but I didn't get any friends either. I was a girl who smelled and dressed funny. I now understand that my mother could not protect me then because she could not protect herself. She had also been raised to believe that women accepted whatever men dished out. It took me a long time to realize that this was the way of thinking that did not need to be the truth for me. As a child, I repeatedly heard that I was stupid, worthless, and ugly. Somebody else's no-good brat that had to be fed. How could I feel good about myself when I was constantly being bombarded with these negative affirmations. At school, I used to stand in the corner and watch other kids play. I did not feel wanted or needed at home or at school. When I entered my early teens, my stepfather decided he would not beat me so much. However, he did decide that he would start going to bed with me. This began a new cycle of horror that lasted until I left home when I was 15. At that point, I was so starved for love and had such low self-esteem that if some young man put his arm around me, I would go to bed with him. I had no self-worth, so how could I have morals? When I just turned 16, I had a baby girl. I knew her for only 5 days until I handed her over to her new parents. Looking back at now, I realized the baby needed to find her way to those particular parents, and I was a vehicle to get her there. With my lack of self-esteem and my negative beliefs about myself, I needed the experience of shame, because that's what she felt like was the only thing that made her feel comfortable, because she was used to that in her life. It all fit together. I get it. That's an extreme example, but it's not uncommon, especially for people that go into the healing fields. It's not. You hear these stories over and over and over again. She went on and started doing some pretty amazing things. She actually went on and became a model. She was doing some modeling. She was doing a bunch of other stuff. And then all of a sudden, she was married for 16 years until her husband left her for another person. And that's when all of a sudden she started her spiritual path. So she's humming along, going great, and then all of a sudden she gets cancer. And when she gets cancer, all of a sudden she starts getting into divine science and the Centers for Spiritual Growth, I think is what they're called, the Ernest Holmes stuff. And she starts using affirmations and doing spiritual treatments. She actually becomes a practitioner, and all of a sudden she heals her life. And in the process of doing that, she wrote that little tiny book, the one that sold 33 million copies, called You Can Heal Your Life, and then she went on to create this amazing publishing company, and she lived till she was 90 years old. She is a force to be reckoned with. And yet, if we looked at that during the setup, would we have said any of that was probably going to happen for her? Nope. Do you know what she said about her experience when she was growing up and she looked at it? Every experience is a success. Every experience is a success, which blows my mind that she could have that kind of a perspective after going through that much trauma in her life. I love what the Bhagavad Gita says in terms of looking at life that way. The quote is, whatever happened, happened for good. Whatever is happening for good. Whatever will happen for good. Really? Really? Can we really live life that way? Can we really see it that way? And what I present to you today is when you're going through those times, and I don't just mean us on an individual basis, by the way, I am also talking as humanity and the consciousness of humanity. Is there a chance that what's going on right now a setup? Think about that. And I know that I'm probably very few people on this planet right now that are saying it, but I so believe it in my heart and soul, I can scream it as loud as I see it. Because in my mind, I honestly believe this. We as a humanity have a shadow side. And in order for us to heal the shadow, just like we need to do it on an individual basis, that shadow needs to be exposed. The shadow is being exposed. That's what's happening, in my opinion. How many know who that is? Maya Angelou, beautiful, loved poet, beautiful, loved writer, just a beautiful soul. If you've read any of her work, she is just an amazing. How many people know her story? I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1928. Her parents divorced when she was 3. She and her brother went to live with her grandmother in Stamps, Arkansas. When she was 8, she was raped by her mother's boyfriend. When she revealed what happened, her uncle kicked the culprit to death. As a result, frightened by the power of her own tongue, she chose not to speak for 5 years. 5 years. I'm not talking. From this quiet beginning emerged a young woman who sang and danced and recorded poetry. After moving to San Francisco with her mother and brother in 1940, Angelou began taking dance lessons, eventually auditioning for professional theater. However, her plans were put on hold when she had a son at the age of 16. She moved to San Diego, worked as a nightclub waitress, tangled with drugs and prostitution, and danced in a strip club. Ironically, the strip club saved her life. She was discovered there by a theater group. She auditioned for the international tour of Porgy and Bess and won a role. From 1954 to 1955, she toured 22 countries. In 1959, she moved to New York, became friends with the prominent Harlem writers, and got involved with the civil rights movement. In 1961, she moved to Egypt with a boyfriend and edited the Arab Observer. After leaving her boyfriend, she headed to Ghana, where a car accident severely injured her son. While caring for him in Ghana, she took a job at the African Review, where she stayed for several years. Her writing and personal development flourished under the African cultural renaissance that was taking place at the time. When she returned to the U.S., she began publishing her multi-volume autobiography, starting with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. 4 more volumes appeared during the next 2 decades, as well as several books on poetry. In 1981, she was appointed the professor of American Studies at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem. She was nominated for several important awards and read a poem written for the occasion at President Clinton's inauguration. If you were to go back and look at everything, all the tragedies, all the things that happened in her life, you could easily sit there and think to yourself, really? And yet, look what it created. Again, another force to be reckoned with. At the end of it, one of my favorite quotes she has is, "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." You can decide not to be reduced by them. I like this quote by Socrates. "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." So sometimes when change happens, what do we have a tendency to do? We hold on. And if we could just understand that the change is actually for good, then we can kind of relax. And I think that's what he was getting at. As I was preparing for our talk today, I've been going back lately. I don't know why, but I've always, conversations with God, anybody delve into that at all? It's one of my favorite things that came out about 20 years ago, and it's just, I love Neil Donald Walsch. I love his works, I love his writings. And I was going back and reading about that, and in this conversation with God, Neil was going back and forth with God, and God basically just made a statement that says you can be, do, or have anything that you want to. The problem is you don't believe that. The problem is you think the promise is so outrageously crazy that it could never happen. And Neil Donald Walsch comes back and says, wait a minute, you mean to tell me that people that have got physical disabilities and handicaps can do anything that they want to? And I want to share with you the response, because I think it says a lot in terms of trying to understand and wrap my mind around times when things happen that I don't quite understand, especially when it's other people in our lives that are going through some very difficult times and we don't understand it, and we get mad and we get upset and we think that it's wrong. He says, Neil Donald Walsch says, that does not answer the question of the feeble, the infirm, the handicapped, those who are limited. And God replies, do you think they're limited, as you put it, not of their choice? Do you imagine that the human soul encounters life challenges, whatever they may be, by accident? Is that your imagining? And then Neil Donald Walsch says, well, wait a minute, do you mean the soul chooses what kind of life it will experience ahead of time? And God says, no, that would defeat the purpose of the encounter. The purpose is to create your experience and thus create yourself in the glorious moment of now. You do not, therefore, choose the life you'll experience ahead of time. You may, however, select the person, the places, the events, the conditions, the circumstances, the challenges and obstacles, the opportunities, the options with which to create your experience. You may select the colors for your palette, the tools for your chest, the machinery for your shop. What you create with this is your business. That is the business of life. Your potential is unlimited in all the way that you've chosen to do. Do not assume that a soul which has incarnated in a body, which you call limited, has not reached its full potential. For you do not know what the soul is trying to do. You do not understand its agenda. You are unclear as to its intent. Therefore, bless every person and condition and give thanks. Thus you affirm the perfection of God's creation and show your faith in it. For nothing happens by accident in God's world, and there is no such thing as coincidence, nor is the world buffeted by random choice or something you call fate. If a snowflake is utterly perfect in its design, do you not think the same could be said about something as magnificent as your life? Abraham Lincoln, pretty special guy, did some pretty amazing things. I want to share with you some things that happened to him. He was born in 1809 in a cabin. They were poor. In 1860, so he's 7 years old, his family was forced out of their home, and he had to work to support them at 7 years old. When he was 2 years later, when he was 9, his mother died. As he started growing up in 1831, he failed in business. In 1932, he ran for the state legislature, lost. In 1832, he also lost his job and he wanted to go to law school, but he couldn't get in. In 1833, a year later, he borrowed some money from a friend to begin a business, and by the end of it, he was bankrupt. He spent the next 17 years of his life paying off this debt. In 1834, he ran for state legislator, but this time he won. In 1835, he was engaged to be married, but his sweetheart died and his heart was broken. In 1836, he had a total nervous breakdown, complete and total nervous breakdown, and was in bed for 6 months. In 1838, he sought to become the Speaker of the state legislature and lost. In 1840, he sought to become an elector and he lost. In 1843, he ran for Congress and he lost. In 1846, he ran for Congress again. That time he won. Went to Washington and did a pretty good job. 2 years later, he ran for re-election and he lost. A year later, he sought the job of land office in his home state and he was rejected. He lost. In 1854, he ran for the Senate of the United States and he lost. In 1856, he sought the vice president nomination for his party at the National Convention, and he got less than 100 votes. In 1858, he ran for the U.S. Senate again. He lost. 2 years later, he runs for the president of the United States, and he wins. And he wins. I wanted to share these stories with you because life isn't, well, always easy. And when Lincoln looked back at all of that, I love this quote that he gave us. Success is going from failure to failure and never losing your enthusiasm. What a quote from a guy that spent by far the majority of his life losing and failing. Such a powerful story, right? When we're living our lives, when all of a sudden we realize and we can understand that what's going on we may not understand, then all of a sudden we can look at our plan and realize that maybe, just maybe, there's something else that's going on. And I'm not always saying that that's easy. I'm not. There's a lot of things going on in our lives. Some of them are good and some of them aren't. Sometimes we get phone calls from people that we love dearly, and all of a sudden they're giving a pretty horrific medical diagnosis. And of course, we feel for that, right? I'm not saying it's always easy to see it, but I'm just saying that sometimes there might be something else going on in our lives that's setting us up for something more, and we just simply can't see it. And it's okay if you can't see it. But when you have faith in your own divinity, when you have faith that the world is really trying to figure this thing out and bring us back into balance and back into alignment, then you understand when stuff shows up in your life that doesn't look so great and pretty and flowery and, yeah, that's great. Then you start to understand that, wow, maybe, just maybe, there's something else that's going on. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions to play with as you go out throughout your day and your week. And that is, what if there was a bigger plan when you're going through something? The plan, as I call it. In other words, maybe you set yourself up from a soul standpoint to go through some things to make this big expansion, that your soul's going through exactly what your soul wanted to learn and what your soul needed to learn. And what if you're going through a setup like we talked about? Let me ask you this question. How would you think, feel, and act differently if you knew that what was happening was for your greatest growth? In other words, instead of fearing it, instead of being scared of it, instead of, oh my God, how would you think, act, and speak differently if you thought, wow, here's a great opportunity for me? How would you think, feel, and act differently if you knew that you weren't a victim? In other words, it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. What if you knew that while you're in the middle of the setup, you may not be able to see or understand what the plan is? What if you knew that? You mean to tell me I'm not supposed to have all the answers when everything's blown up around me and I don't understand it? No, you're not. Really? Yeah. You mean it's okay if I sit there and I think, oh my God, the world's falling apart? Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. You mean it's okay if I stand here and don't know and have all the answers? Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. Is it okay for me, though, to trust that maybe something else is going on that I don't understand, that I can't see right now, but that in time it's going to make perfect sense to me? Yeah. So I leave here this morning with you this thought or this idea as we're all going through our trials and tribulations, that sometimes, maybe, just maybe, these stories that you heard today will inspire you to understand that sometimes when we go through these things, it's just the setup, that there is a bigger plan at play. And whether that's being done on an individual basis or maybe it's being done on a human consciousness basis, that it's all divine, that there's something that's going on there to help us bring us back into alignment. From a human consciousness standpoint, my belief is that we're really coming together. And I know, Mike, you haven't picked up a paper in the last 6 months. Yes, I have. It's just that my belief is, in order for you to heal, the stuff's got to be exposed. It's got to be brought out to the light so that we can see it. Guess what? We're seeing it. I think more so than any time in the history of mankind, womankind. I do believe that. I do believe it. I'm going to leave you with a quote. I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the I am is with you wherever you go. The I am. We all have it within us. It's always there. It's kind of like gravity. It's always on, and we can always access it. It never, ever, ever leaves you because of who and what you are. And don't ever, ever forget that. Blessings. God bless.